She sides up on God's team. She said, I've heard about what's gone on there, and I'm going to be on your team. And Jewish tradition says that she married Joshua. Christian tradition, we have it in the Bible that she's in the lineage of Jesus. In these examples, we see three things: that faith is mental assent, the switch is turned on. Faith is emotional conviction, the starter's turning over. Faith is willful action, the engine, unlike my snowblower, has kicked in. And I think I'm going to have it on the screen here. We're seeing the mind, the emotions, and the will continually coming up here. The mind, the emotions, and the will. And I just want you to know that's your soul. Louis Berkhoff, in his book Systematic Theology, is quoted by theologians all the time, and it addresses this issue. Louis Berkhoff says that faith uses three words: notitia, sensus, fiducia. He says it's knowledge of the facts, that's my mind. It's conviction of those facts, that's my emotions. And it's willful trust of those facts, that's my will. Thoughts, feelings, actions. Switch, the mental switch. It's intentional, not accidental. Write that down. It's intentional, not accidental. The starter, the emotions. It's passionate, not dutiful. It's passionate. Faith is passionate. Real faith is passionate, not dutiful. And then as far as the engine is concerned, it's active, not passive, like my snowblower was. It's active, not passive. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them, this is what I tell my girls' basketball team, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them, that's what we're trying to get here. And Jesus closes his Sermon on the Mount, therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and does them is like a wise man. Wisdom is faith working, by the way. A wise man who built his house on the rock. Henry Nouwen was the theologian at Notre Dame and out east. Great mind, written many outstanding books, and you should read them. I got to hear him speak before he passed away. Henry Nouwen said, you know what? I cannot teach this faith any longer and not go live it. And he went to a place for the mentally and physically challenged, and he served them till the day he died in Toronto. I cannot just teach this faith and not live it. By faith, Abraham, by faith, Rahab, by faith, Kelly Bird comes from California to join this church. By faith, Anna Jury prays for us on staff daily. By faith, Marty and Joy Caton say, you know what, let's go do this business thing in Fort Wayne and leave the Carolinas. By faith, Tony Opliger prays and leads this place in prayer. By faith, Steve Longbreak ministers into my life. By faith, Dave Walters speaks truth to me and breathes life into me. By faith, Mark Rhodes comes and sees me on Tuesdays and gives his life not only to this place, but to Youth for Christ. And I can go on and on and on. By faith, Steve Wild leaves a nice paying job and comes here to be athletic director and director of development. By faith. In this stormy life, does your faith work? Is the switch on? Mental assent? Is the starter turning over? Emotional conviction? And the engine running? Willful action? Like Abraham's, and I got to ask myself this, is your faith complete? Is my faith complete? But I want to differentiate now on this final point between faith in our faith and faith in Christ. Many well-intending and well-meaning Christians have taught us to have faith in our faith. And I want to talk about faith in Christ. And finally, we have the spark plug. You know, I messed up my spark plug. And that's where the fire comes from. That's where that spark comes from to get that whole thing going. And in my, I sound like I know all these things. I really don't. I just can articulate them. But that's what I did to my snowblower. And so listen, this language is just so beautiful. In verse 26, how James ends this, as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. I think every word counts in this one. Nekros is the word for dead. It's different than the word Kelly and I talked about earlier in this letter. And it literally means to have the spirit removed. To have the spirit removed. Jesus on the cross, but right before he died, said, Father, into your hands I commit my what? My spirit. Pneuma, the breath of God. The breath of God. John calls it the light. If my soul is my vertical window, my spirit, if my soul is my horizontal window, see, I have no mechanical intelligence. My spirit is my vertical window. My vertical window. And it's really interesting that he writes this. Do you know, maybe you've read this, that James' bones have probably been found. They found this stone box, and on it said, James bar Joseph, James, son of Joseph, comma, and now a phrase that doesn't exist on other boxes that they find like this. Brother of Jesus. Archaeologists found it. And they know there's 20 combinations that could be of James, son of Joseph. But they said to have brother of Jesus, that's not on those boxes that we find. That means that this Jesus was a very important man. He was God. And it's almost like God showing us James 2:26. You know what? James isn't in there. James isn't in that box. His spirit's with God. And you and I have this light in us, this spirit that God gives us, his breath, and we can either accept him or we can reject him. But there's going to come a day when it's too late, and you're just going to be bones in a box because your spirit's going one way or another. Well, the soul plus the spirit, that horizontal window and vertical window to the light, which is life, that's your heart. The soul plus the spirit, I think that's your heart, your entire inner being. And that spirit gives life. It gives life. Genesis 1:26, God says, let us make man in our own image. Us. The declarative for Elohim, for God, is plural. Let us. Christ is there. John writes that Christ created us. John 1:9, one of my favorite verses, I say it again and again and again. Jesus Christ lights the heart of every man. He gives them a spirit, and with that spirit, which he will draw, they can accept or reject it. And there's a time when you'll be bones in the box. And what are you going to do with that? Steve said it as Christ is the cosmic glue. And he says, I know him. I know him. Personal God. Paul writes that we live by the Spirit in Romans 8:4, and he goes on 5 verses later to say that's the Spirit of Christ. In 2 Timothy 1:6 or 7, we talk about this spark. You know, I'm using the spark plug in my snowblower for this. Paul writes, fan the flame. 2 Timothy 1:6, fan that flame. Fan that flame, that Spirit. And he goes on in verse 7, and a lot of you have this memorized, 2 Timothy 1:7. That spirit of power, that spirit of love, that spark plug of power, that spark plug of love and self-discipline. The Spirit is what keeps us from faith in our faith, but gives us the opportunity for faith in Christ who fills everything in every way, Ephesians 1:23. Christ gives eternal, abundant life when we fully surrender our spirits to his Spirit. When we fully surrender. Hebrews 12:2 says Jesus is, it says fix our eyes on Jesus, right? The author and perfecter of our faith. Jesus Christ, fix our eyes on, is the object of our faith. He's the author of our faith. He's the perfecter of our faith. There's an acronym for faith. You might want to write it down. Forsaking all, I trust him. Forsaking all, I trust him. Forsaking all, I trust him. Real, complete faith is intentional. It's not by accident. The switch of the mind is turned on. It's passionate, not dutiful. The starter, the emotions, the convictions are going. It's active, not passive. The engine, the willful action is going. And it's lit by Christ, not myself. And that's the Spirit. We can't even take credit for our faith. He's the light of the world, and he says that you and I as believers, when we say yes and fully surrender him, we're the light. What's the light for? To help others see. To help others see the love of Christ. And that is what also that light does, is it loves. Jesus says, be the salt, be the light. Do deeds of love so you can communicate me. Do deeds of love so you can communicate from me. I grew up in a church singing, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Hide it under a bushel? No. I'm going to let it shine. And I hid it under a bushel.